Hey, thank you very much for coming. I don't think I have much to say by way of introducing myself. I think that's pretty much taken care of at this stage of the game. As you were told, I'm the founder of a group called the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates. We have an office aboard USS Salem, but we travel around quite a bit. This is our logo. You can see 139 at the top is an homage to USS Salem, which is CA 139. And our logo at the bottom, our motto kind of is the dead live. This is something that we live by. And our group is, I like to think, is a little bit different than a lot of other groups that do what we do, in that we have devout believers, of course, but we have some guys in our group that are rabid skeptics. The co-founder of my group actually is the kind of guy who, as we're standing in this room now, this equipment could all lift off the table and fly across the room, and Pat would say, well, yeah, but the building's old and settling, and the floor's a little tilted, and the air conditioning's on, so there's a breeze, and that blew some of it. It's really more infuriating than anything else, but it's a very, very good thing for us. I think we're much more careful than a lot of people are when we gather evidence. We don't just splash it all over the place until we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that it's the real thing and that it's valid before we tell everybody about it. One of the things about having a group that's made up of all those different people is that it helps us in terms of our approach. We're able to look at the things we do from really all angles. As I said, we look at it from the angle of believers. We look at it skeptically as well. We have a number of people in our group who are very, very sensitive and are able to walk into a room and get a pretty good idea that we're dealing with something or nothing and kind of point us in the right direction, and that helps us a lot of the time. We do a lot of work in terms of historical research. That's a big part of what we do on the ship in particular. But the big thing about our approach is that the entities that we deal with, always on the ship, but everywhere we try to treat them with the same respect that we would have treated them if we met them as people in life. They deserve to be treated with respect. They're people after all. The guys on the ship spent time defending our country in uniform and out to sea and deserve to be treated with respect, and that's the way we do things. There are a lot of people in our field now that go a different direction. There's a lot of yelling and screaming. Those of you who watch television and watch the ghost shows on TV know what I'm talking about. And we don't allow any of that aboard the ship. Ghost Adventures is probably the biggest show on TV today, and we turned them down when they asked if they could come to the ship, because we don't need them. We don't need that kind of behavior, and we don't put up with it. And most importantly, we travel around a lot together and we have a lot of fun. And I think probably that'll be the time to hang it up. When we're not laughing anymore, then that'll pretty much be the end of us doing what we're doing. And here's a great picture. You can see that we're a fun group. Oh, that's not us. So this is us, and this is the house that you were told about. This is the Sally House in Atchison, Kansas. Most people that do what we do would tell you that it is the most haunted house in America. We spent the night there last June, and I said earlier, this is probably the only place I've ever been that didn't want us there, that made it very clear to us it didn't want us there. We have some instruments that audibly spit out words, and one of our groups, Sandra Morgan, at some point in one of the bedrooms upstairs, the obelisk, it's called, said, "Sandra dies tonight." We used a Ouija board that several times spelled out, "Kill you all tonight." It's a very, very dark place. Its history is dark, and I don't think it wanted us there. As you can see from this picture, this was before we spent the night. We took another one in the morning. It's much more somber. If you do watch TV, if you watch ghost shows, or even not, you may have seen us around. We've been on most of the Discovery Channel shows. I think now it's the Travel Channel, or I think it's probably might as well be the Ghost Hunting Channel at this stage of the game. But we've been on most of those shows. Kindred Spirits was the best one. That was a great experience. The others, not so much. Channel 5's Chronicle did a spot with us. Channel 4, CBS Boston did a spot with us. We're regulars on WETD, which is now WMEX as well, I think. And we're on WBZ pretty regularly as well as kind of a feature. I'm very friendly with a guy by the name of Jason Hawes, who is the original ghost hunter on television. I call him, he is to ghost hunting what Hugh Hefner was to nudie magazines. He really was the guy that brought it to television back on the Sci-Fi Channel back in the old days. And I often tell Jason that he's been on TV for 20 years, and in one afternoon, we had a bigger audience than he's had through his whole career. Because ESPN called us. This is the coach at UConn, Jim Mora, who used to be the coach of the Atlanta Falcons. ESPN called us because the coach feels as though his house down on the campus at UConn is haunted. And they brought us down there for an evening. We did a quickie investigation, maybe 4 hours. And we were featured on ESPN's College Game Day, the Saturday before Halloween last year. So I'm fairly sure that audience was bigger than Jason got on the Discovery Channel's Ghost Hunters. So we've been around, and you know, like I said, we try to have a good time. I think the first group that ESPN brought in, they took themselves a little too seriously, and that's certainly not us. So we're going to talk about some of the equipment we use before we get into the Salem. But before we do that, I want to clarify something. Most of the equipment we use is based on measuring the electromagnetic field. And I'm embarrassed to say that 90% of the ghost hunters you talk to will tell you that, and hope to God you don't ask them what an electromagnetic field is, because most of them haven't the slightest idea. So before we go into the equipment, I just want to very briefly say, an electromagnetic field is a field that surrounds and interacts with any object that has an electric charge. That includes living creatures that have electric charges in their cells, primarily in their brains. The name itself tells you that it has an electric and a magnetic component, transmits primarily as light waves. Like everything else, it varies in strength and frequency. You know, a word now that everybody uses to measure things is spectrum. And it's the same here, an electromagnetic spectrum. As I already said, all living organisms produce electromagnetic fields. Most of our equipment isn't sensitive enough to pick up the electronic field emitted by a human. Some of it is. The big thing, the last thing here, when we go to a new location, a place we've never been, we do two things. We take an electromagnetic field meter, not one of these, but a very basic one that every electrician in the world carries in his toolbox. We take a couple of those and we take a couple of laser thermometers, and we go through the whole location, taking what we call background. So that later on in the evening, if we're in a room and we get some crazy EMF readings, we've got a pretty good idea whether we're dealing with something anomalous or whether we're dealing with something that was there the whole time due to wiring in the wall or a router above us or something along those lines. That's a standard practice before we go to any new location. So a couple of the pieces of it, I'm gonna show you a quick video. And I love this video because it encompasses a whole bunch of things. Back in the day when we first started doing this, and like I said, if you watch the TV shows, the first piece of equipment, this is a K2 meter. And it was kind of the go-to. It was the first piece of equipment everybody bought. Jen, was it the first piece of equipment you bought? Of course it was. And it's an EMF detector. It's just got lights on it. And we still have it on the ship because the guests like lights. So that's what we do. But what happens, and you can see the lights, it goes on a spectrum to measure the strength of the signal. But what tends to happen is, at some point, the people who make K2 meters come to the conclusion that they've basically sold about as many K2 meters as they're going to sell, so they need to come up with something else. And they always come up with something more expensive. This is called a Paralight, and when I open it up, you'll see that it does the same thing the K2 meter does. It measures EMF, and it changes color depending on the strength of the field. This is actually a great piece of equipment because this may be the least sensitive piece of equipment we have. When it goes off, obviously there's no way to know for sure that we're dealing with something paranormal, but when this goes off, we at least have a pretty good sense that something's going on because it doesn't go off very easily. This is another EMF-based piece of equipment. This is much more sensitive. This is one that a human can set off very easily. It's called a REM pod. And the difference between a REM pod and the other EMF equipment we use is that the REM pod emits its own electromagnetic field. So that not only is it measuring something external, it's also measuring something like a delta between something external and the field that it's emitting itself. So I think that's why it's a little bit more sensitive. So this video, it's a conversation with a guy aboard the ship that we call the chief. And we're going to talk about him later. It's in a long, narrow room called the wardroom galley. The wardroom is the room where officers ate all their meals. And on a ship as big as the Salem, the wardroom has its own pantry and its own galley. And the chief nowadays primarily hangs out in the wardroom galley. So what you're going to see is, we're in the wardroom galley. You're going to see a Paralight, a REM pod behind it, and they are going to go off in response to questions. Generally what happens is, if the answer to the question is no, nothing happens. And if the answer is yes, the equipment lights up. This is generally the way it works. This particular video is great too because at some point an entity that's in the galley with us leaves. And what happens is it clearly goes down one side of the room because two of the women in the room get these headaches as it goes by. And it sets off a motion detector out in the passageway. And I know that if you're looking at the video, one of the gang, Michelle Rosner, is standing kind of to the right of the door, and the motion detector is on the left side of the door pointed the other direction. And you're going to hear it go off. And we're going to ask the chief who it was, and he's going to tell us he knows who it is, but it's somebody that we've never spoken to before, which is incredibly rare. The other thing you need to know about this video is that on the day we took it, I had been told earlier in the day that a very, very close friend of mine, as much a brother as my brothers, who I had served with in the Navy 40 years ago, passed away that morning. And we had been talking about it. So that's where most of the questions are gonna revolve around, okay? The other thing is, we had been talking about whether or not the ghosts on the ship could read our minds. So we're gonna ask him about that as well. So, Chief, I want to ask you something, because there are some of us who feel as though you folks on the other side have the capability sometimes to know what's going on in our heads. So I'm going to ask you, do you know who I lost today?
Well,
Do you know what his rank was?
did you hear us talking about it? Wow. So when we first got to the ship tonight, Chief, Don told me that he lost a friend. Did you hear us talking about that? You did. Okay.
He was a first-class cook.
He was a meth specialist?
I only bring that up because the chief.
Was that the guy with your roommate?
He wasn't
Bunkmate?
my roommate. He wasn't my roommate. But I mean, 42 years we've been thick as thieves.
So you.
All right, so you just heard us talking about it. Okay. All right, that's cool.
So you can't read minds.
No, apparently not. To be honest, I'm good with that. Like really good with that.
Chief, tonight in the hospital, we were talking to Petty Officer O'Brien,
Petty Officer O'Brien is
and
also
it seemed like he was being disturbed by another spirit or entity. And it seemed like it wasn't just there, but Michelle was playing with Lucy in the third mess tonight, and again she was scared away. Do you know what's scaring her away? You do.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. And your relationship with this other entity, you just kind of leave each other alone, don't you?
That wasn't the game plan.
There's the motion detector.
I did not move. And I think you went right past me.
Yeah, because that's facing the other way.
Because I had this tingling in my head. I don't know who that was.
I don't know, that's facing the surgery, so certainly didn't set it off.
Chief, are you still here? Are you still here with us right now? You are. Okay.
Okay, this may sound crazy, but I also had this pain in my head right before that went off.
Really?
I mean, it could have just been a headache, but it didn't last long.
Oh, it could have been somebody going by. So was there someone else in here with us besides you? I did. Okay. And that entity left?
That's pretty crazy.
Okay.
So that's what. So you said the sensor's facing the other way down?
Yeah,
Yeah.
'Cause it's- I can-
the surgery.
see it
But
reflecting
that
off.
makes sense. If it left, it went by, it affected her, and then it went right out the door. Do you know who that was? Was it the one we were just talking about? Okay. Was it somebody we know? All right. So, like I said, I think that just gives you an idea of the equipment, how it works, what we see and what we hear when we talk to these guys on the ship. Another piece of equipment that we use is called an SLS camera. An SLS camera is basically video game technology. If you've ever seen, like on YouTube sometimes, they'll show you a video of them making a video game, and the guys have the radar reflective dots on them. So basically what an SLS camera is, it's a radar emitter, and you have what amounts to an iPad monitor, and what you're looking at on the monitor is whatever's bouncing back from the emitter. And as a result, what you're looking at basically are stick figures. And I've never been a big fan of SLS because it maps everything. You know what I mean? If you're in this room, of course it would map all you folks, but it would map the empty chairs, it would map the tripod with the camera, it maps everything. So I've never really been a fan because I've never felt as though we were really sure what we were looking at. But this particular night, the Emory Estate is a fairly new location. It's right across the Forber Bridge down by Legion Field in Weymouth, across the street actually from Legion Field. And on the third floor in one of the bedrooms, it's a really active place. There is supposed to be a young boy named Timothy who was killed in a carriage accident in front of the house. So there were 3 of us in this bedroom on the 3rd floor. And what you're gonna see when I first start the video is a small figure, small stick figure. And then at some point, I'm gonna walk over and stand next to it to give it some scale.
Do you mind if I walk over there?
Go ahead then.
Do you see me now?
Yep,
Where am I in relation to this thing?
you're about twice the size of it,
But I mean, where is it?
right on your left. Are you facing me?
Mhm.
On your left.
Here.
Nope, your other hand. Right there.
It's on your right.
It's on your right. Can you, its
That was
head,
the radio.
its head is up. Can you grab his hand, can you grab Don's hand for me? Oh,
The heck?
your hand's on his shoulders, Don. It's,
I get the chills, I can tell you that
it's,
right now.
it's caressing against you. It's leaning against you.
I got the chills, I'll tell you that right now. I mean, I can feel
Pat,
it.
you see what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
Its head straight up, looking at you.
Holy shit.
I mean,
Don, it lowered its shoulder. It lowered its left shoulder so that your arm is around it.
I'm telling you right now, I don't think I've ever had the chills like this.
It's a boy. It's a little kid. Are you a little boy? Can you raise your hand and tell me that you're a little boy? No? If you're a little girl, can you raise your hand? Can you put your hand in the air for me? It stood straight up as soon as you moved, Don. Its shoulders are straight now.
Can you reach out?
There you go. There
Reach
you
out
go.
and take my hand?
it's like he's touching your leg. or
He's
something.
he's kneeling down next to you. There you go. It's touching your hand. It's holding your hand. Pat, you see that?
Yeah, I see it.
It's holding your hand.
It sure feels like it's holding.
And I can tell you right now, there's no question that it was holding my hand.
I mean, are you comfortable this way? Is this what you know, are you comfortable holding my hand like this? Oh,
I don't know if you can hear it. At some point, they're asking me to raise my arm, and I'm telling them I can't. And you're going to see why.
Pat, are you seeing this?
Yeah, it's almost like he's trying to climb up.
He's
on you.
climbing up on you.
I need to ask you, are you Timothy? Because my son is named Timothy.
He's swinging on your hand, Don.
Yeah. Oh, whoa. It's like he's trying to climb up on you.
So I thought that was pretty good. And like I said, I've never been a fan of this form of evidence, but I thought that was pretty convincing. So another piece of equipment. Does anybody have a cat? Don't even get me started. This is a cat ball. And I love this. I've been doing this like 20 years now, and I still get this massive charge when a cat ball goes off. And I think the reason for that is, you know, all this other stuff, there's always in the back of your mind a little bit of a doubt. You know what I mean? When the REM pod goes off, it's awesome when it goes off in response to questions. You know what I mean? The timing tells you that something unique is happening. But at the same time, there are atmospheric reasons why it might be able to go off, but not a cat ball. Something's got to touch a cat ball. That's the only way a cat ball goes off. So these are some videos of cat ball on the ship. And I always like to give credit where credit's due, because I didn't take these videos. The one on the left was taken by an amazing group of hearing impaired ghost hunters. I don't even know how they do what they do. They're called Silence Paranormal. And then the one on the right, Of all the ghost groups I know of, my favorite name of a paranormal group is Schrodinger's Ghost. And that's who took this video on the other side. I love the way it rocks a little bit before it falls. This other one's a little bit harder because what you're seeing is a bed in the hospital aboard the ship, and you're looking at it lengthwise. What you see here is a tray for somebody who's in bed, like a tray to eat off of or play solitaire, whatever they did. And you see the bottom of the pillow. The cat ball is on the pillow. I kind of like that one. But the guy that's the head of Schrodinger's Ghost, I had to cut the audio off of that video. So before we get to the ship, these are some of the places we've done. Some of them you know about, some of them you don't. You know, the Lizzie Borden house, of course, we've spent 3 nights there. The Conjuring house in Harrisville is where the movie The Conjuring, the family that was featured in that movie, that's their actual house. S.K. Pierce Victorian Mansion is a very, very active location. You see the Sally House down there. You may have heard of the Villisca, the axe murders in Villisca, Iowa. We spent the night at that house. There's nothing like a good prison. Burlington County Prison in New Jersey. Mid-Orange was pretty active. And Pennhurst is a massive asylum, multi-building asylum outside Philadelphia. That's a really great location. For some reason, Hell House isn't here. I love found footage horror movies, and there's a great found footage movie on Prime called Hell House LLC, and we've spent a couple of nights at that hotel that they used for that movie. And here we are at these places: Eastern States Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Villisca, as I said, Pennhurst. This is the Hinsdale House in Hinsdale, New York. The Emory Estate, the Sally House again. But I want to get down to, this is where our heart is. This is where my heart certainly is the USS Salem down at the Fall River Shipyard. For those of you, just a quick primer, for those of you who don't know, Salem is a heavy cruiser. She is the only heavy cruiser left in existence. She had 2 sister ships, the Des Moines and the Newport News, that are both gone now. They were both in service longer than Salem, but are both long gone. I always tell people that if there is a Navy ship anywhere in the world that saw no combat but saw as much death as Salem, I would like to hear about it, because I don't believe it exists. She spent most of her time in the Mediterranean with the 6th Fleet. And in 1953, there was a very bad earthquake on one of the Ionian Islands off the coast of Greece. And I think just by virtue of being there, she was basically the hospital. And the estimates are that about 1,700 people were brought aboard for treatment. And the death toll during that incident is about 85, with 10 babies born on the ship. She was only there for about 3 days. You know, you got to remember, being a warship, she wasn't outfitted for that. She couldn't sustain that kind of mission. She didn't have the kind of medical supplies or food or even fresh water, really, that it would have taken to stay there very long. So after about 3 days, she came home to Boston. And I want to say the second day she was back in Boston, a light aircraft carrier, the USS Lady, had a catapult explosion on her flight deck. A bunch of guys were killed outright. 11 guys were brought to Salem for treatment, and 6 of those guys died aboard Salem. 1956, she was headed back to the Med, steaming with a destroyer called John R. Pierce. Pierce Pierce was doing anti-aircraft drills, and for some reason they stopped the drill. And when they restarted it, they loaded a gun that had already been loaded. So needless to say, that mount exploded. 7 of those guys were brought aboard Salem for treatment, and 4 of those guys died aboard Salem. So between those incidents and 3 deadly accidents that we know of aboard the ship during routine patrols, we think the death toll was about 100 in total during her 10 years of service. When we first started aboard Salem, the initial people we talked to primarily were Greek civilians. We talked to a young man named Nico, who we always felt terrible after we spoke to him because he was this young guy who always told us he was looking for his family. And the idea that we could talk to him but we could never do anything for this poor guy was really killed you. Nico is no longer aboard the ship. At least we no longer talk to him. And I've chosen to believe that's because he found his family and they all moved on. Whether or not that really happened, I don't know, but that's what I've decided I'm going to believe, and nobody's going to talk me out of it. We have a 7-year-old girl named Lucy. You heard my man Lou mention her in the video. We speak to her on a very regular basis. We speak to her using equipment for the most part, but her parents are both aboard the ship. We speak to her mother. Primarily using dowsing rods. And I always tell everybody that maybe it's just because I'm old, that I prefer old school equipment. Of everything we use, this is far and away my favorite piece of equipment. I'll try to, as you can see, I'm not touching them. They're copper rods and they're in a sleeve, so I'm not touching the sticks themselves. And, so they just spin freely. But if there's anybody in this room that would like to have a conversation, can you point the sticks directly away from me, please? There you go. Thank you. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. If the answer to the question is yes, how are you going to tell me that the answer is yes? Okay. All right. And if the answer is no, how are you going to tell me the answer is no? All right, that works. You want to straighten them out, please? Now that everybody's seen you say yes or no, can you show me where you are in the room, please? Okay. All right, over by the wall? You're standing over by the wall to the right, left of the door? Okay. All right, I'm going to let you go, but maybe we'll talk a little bit later on. Is that cool? Good. All right, thank you very much. So, these, again, are primarily yes or no point. But I love using these. It may sound silly, but I really feel as though when I use these, the entity that I'm talking to can feel that I'm giving them a little bit of myself, and maybe are a little bit more willing to give a little of themselves back to me. So I really enjoy using these. I don't use one, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. This is my pendulum. Whether it sounds misogynistic or not, I'm going to say anyway that for whatever reason, it's the girls who seem to be able to use the pendulums. I can't. I'm just always afraid I'm not steady enough to hold it and give you a baseline. And I love watching them use the pendulums because whether you believe that it's doing what they tell you it's doing or not, it is amazing to watch, when it's going wild spinning, and then they say, in response to a question, it's going like this, and then they ask another question, and it just stops. Just stops, and starts going back and forth instead, or starts going the other way around. And like I said, whether you want to believe it's doing what they say it's doing or not, it's pretty impressive to watch when it's working. So yeah, we talked to Lucy, we talked to her parents. It's kind of a running gag now with Lucy's mother because I speak to Lucy's mother regularly, and every time I talk to her, I ask her if her husband is there, and she always says yes. And I always ask to speak to him, and she always says no. So for some reason, she doesn't want her husband to talk, which just makes her like every other woman in the world, as far as I'm concerned. Years ago, we used to speak to a lot of children. We used to have children down in the birthing areas. Honestly, never any real conversations, just kind of noise. We had a woman who used to sing Greek lullabies and get a tremendous amount of activity down there. But we learned a long time ago that the language barrier really is no longer a problem once they cross to the other side of the veil. We've never had any issue speaking to somebody that wasn't English or didn't speak English. So I talked about the chief, and he's kind of the bridge. As I said, when we first started, we talked to the Greeks, the civilians. The chief is the one sailor that was always there. He's the one entity that was always aboard the ship. We call him the chief. He likes to be called the chief. I've been talking to the chief for 15 years, and we just found out his name about 2 years ago. And it doesn't matter, as I said, he doesn't like to be called Chief Parker. He likes to be called the chief. He served aboard Salem 56 and 57. I'll talk about how we know these things in a minute. He was a cook, a chief commissaryman. The chief did not die aboard Salem. And I think he considers himself the guardian of the ship. For those of you, any of you who were in the service, then you know these guys. I knew guys who came to the Navy from nothing. I mean, from terrible homes, terrible family lives. They were basically escaping when they joined the Navy. And when they left the Navy, they went back to the same garbage they came from. And the ship was the only home they ever had. The crew was really the only group of people they ever considered to be family. And I believe this is the chief. And I believe this is why when you come aboard Salem and act the fool, the chief is the one you're going to deal with. We had some YouTube guys aboard. And I'm not a YouTube guy, but we've had these young YouTube guys aboard. And they call, and the first guy, his name was Elton Castee. And he called me and he said, I'm a YouTuber. And in all honesty, at 63 years old, my response was, your parents must just be thrilled, a YouTuber. Until he pulled up in his Ferrari, and I realized his parents probably were thrilled. He had probably bought them a mansion someplace. And it turned out that Elton is a very, very nice guy, but they're crazy, like all of them, his whole crew, they're all crazy. And when they first got to the ship, one of the guys started climbing up the side of the 8-inch gun turrets up forward. And when he came down, he had this big gash over his eye. And Elton said, what happened to you? And he said, I don't know. He said, I was fine. He said, I was climbing away. It was no problem. He said, I think I smashed my own head against the metal. And of course, I'm standing down the bottom saying, that's not what happened at all. The chief was letting you know that you need to calm down a little bit aboard his ship. And they had a couple of other little incidents aboard, but when they left, as they were walking down the pier, one of them turned around and took a picture of the ship. And this is the picture he took. And I'm going to tell you now that this shadow has to be 10 feet tall. I mean, those two 8-inch gun turrets are each about 6 feet. And that shadow has to be at least 10 feet tall. And we spent a whole night trying to take that picture. Piling stuff up and standing on it to try to get the height, taking it from different angles on the pier, trying to see if maybe it was an angle thing, and we couldn't do it. And I came to the conclusion that I think this is the chief making sure those sons of bitches were leaving his ship. That's what I think it is. But the chief is not the only one we speak to anymore. These are the guys that we speak to pretty much weekly aboard Salem. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we get there, because that's kind of the whole point of the exercise. As you can see, these are the guys in blue. When you see verified in red, what that means is we've run this guy down and we know who he is. We know he's aboard the ship. We know when he served aboard the ship. When a ship like Salem goes on a long deployment, she comes home, she issues what's called a cruise book. It's kind of like a high school yearbook for the cruise. And it's really, they're aggravating because they're all different. But most of them in the back have a straight alphabetical listing of the crew. And that's an invaluable tool. So in the case of Frank O'Brien, for example, the way it works is this. We're in the hospital, and we have instruments going off all over the place. So we think, okay, we're talking to somebody. Who is it? I don't know. Who the heck knows? Using yeses and nos, we decide he's a sailor. We decide he's from Salem. And using kind of process of elimination, we find that he was aboard Salem 56 and 57. That's good, but it's still not enough really to get a good line on who this guy is. That's where the sensitives come in. We had a Paracon, like a convention, a conference aboard the ship one weekend. And two different sensitives on the same day, one of them said, you know, that guy in the hospital, his name's O'Brien. That's his name, that's who he is. And, you know, we were busy, so we just kind of wrote it down. And one of the others said, his name is Frank. Actually, what she said is his name is Francis, but he doesn't want to be called Francis. He thinks that's effeminate. He likes to be called Frank. So now I can go to the cruise book. And I go to the back of the cruise book for 1956, and sure enough, I find machinist mate 3rd class, Frank O'Brien. So now you go back to the hospital, you spread out your equipment and you say, hey, are you here? And he says yes, and we say, I think we know who you are. And everything in the room goes crazy. I mean, it's like, this guy's excited. And I said, we know now that your first name begins with an F. And he said yes. And the way we do it is, I said, we know your name is Fred. And he said no. And eventually I said Frank, and he said yes. So now we're there, and we do the same thing with O'Brien. And I do the same thing with machinist mate. I say, Frank, now that we're talking to you, I want to tell you, now we know that you're a quartermaster, or we're a quartermaster aboard the ship. And he says no. And sometimes I'll ask, you know what I'm doing, right? You know why I'm fooling around with you. And they usually understand. So now we know we're talking to machinist mate 3rd class Frank O'Brien. As we're in the hospital, one of the other guys we find using basically the same methodology is a gunner's mate 3rd class named Ralph Malott. Now, Ralph Malott was not from Salem. Ralph Malott was from John R. Pierce. And Ralph Malott was hurt in the explosion aboard John R. Pierce and brought to Salem. The mystery that this brings on is, why is it that when Ralph Malott is in this bunk, when you walk into the hospital, why does Frank O'Brien never leave? Why is Frank O'Brien there all the time? Different ship. We have no idea why. How could they have known each other? They served on different ships. Until doing some digging, we came across Ralph Malott's obituary. I want to say newspapers.com. We found his obituary. Ralph Malott and Frank O'Brien graduated from Wilmington, North Carolina High School together. We think they may have known each other before the Navy. And when Malott was hurt and came to Salem, O'Brien rushed to the hospital to be there with his friend. And the great part about that story is that when Malott left, and I have no idea where Malott went, but he's gone. Frank O'Brien is suddenly no longer in the hospital. He's all over the ship now. We talk to him in the hospital sometimes, but we talk to him back aft, and we talk to him in all kinds of different rooms. So these are the kinds of things. It's a mixture of sensitives. It's a mixture of ship's documentation like cruise books. We have a lot of dispatches from Bureau personnel that we go through. We have a lot of old newspaper stuff. And the sensitives are a huge help to fill in gaps or to get you going down the right direction. An interesting case, I've got to replace this slide, is a young kid named Bill Austin. These guys on this side of the board died aboard the ship. Bill Austin was a gunner's mate seaman. He was what in the Navy you call a striker, which means he wasn't a petty officer. He wasn't really a gunner's mate yet, but he was training to be a gunner's mate, and that's called a striker in the Navy. And Bill was killed in number 3 turret, which is the after 8-inch gun turret. We never talked about that because the idea that there was an accident back in number 3 turret was just a story. It was something people talked about, but the volunteers on the ship would say, oh, yeah, guy killed. And you'd say, really? How did it happen? Well, I don't really. Yeah, but when did it happen? Well, I really don't know. Well, who was it? Well, I really don't know. So we never talked about it. It wasn't real enough for us. And about 2 years ago, a woman whose dad served on the ship donated a bunch of letters he wrote home. And it was painstaking, but we scanned all those letters, we divvied them up, and we went through those letters, every single one of them. And sure enough, that guy wrote a letter home about a young kid named Austin, hurt very badly in an accident in turret number 3, bad head injury. They've been working on him all day, and they don't think he's going to make it. So, this is another thing, and I know I use the word know when I say we know. I can appreciate that technically, do we know? Not really. But I think that when you get to a point where you feel as though you've done the kind of due diligence that allows you to say with a strong degree of confidence that you got a pretty good fix on this guy or that. The guy below that is another guy that died on the ship, died in a fall back in the helicopter hangar. And we found him in a very similar way. We found him because this first class hospital corpsman worked on these 2 guys back aft. And we found some of his reports. And we found his report not on Austin, but on Curtis Cochran, and on how he worked on him on one of the triage tables back aft, and that he didn't make it. So again, these are the kinds of things that we go through to try to get the names, try to nail down who we're talking to. Robert Jacoby is a senior chief radioman. Robert Jacoby usually goes home with me when I leave the ship. We try to be careful about that. When we go to some locations, places like the Sally House, we're very, very careful about that. On the ship, I think we're a little bit more lackadaisical. But the funny thing about Jacoby, and you'll see how his name is spelled, Y-A-Y, I was alone in my house one day, down in my office with my dowsing rods, and I said, Robert, we're going to find out your name. Does your first name begin with an A? No. B? No. C? No. All the way to Y. It only took about 2 hours. But because I'm a lot smarter than I look, I said, okay, with the second letter, I'm going to start at Z and go forward. So that took 3 hours. But eventually got his name. And as we started digging, found the decommissioning crew of Salem, the crew that brought her to Philadelphia when she was decommissioned. And sure enough, Radioman Senior Chief Robert Jacoby was one of the decommissioning guys. He's the guy that decommed all the radio equipment. So some of these guys, Frank O'Brien, we've had his daughter come from Seattle, fancies herself a little bit of a psychic. She wasn't very convincing to us. But she came aboard the ship, her name was Eileen, she came aboard the ship and struggled because she said as she was trying to talk to her father, all these other guys were trying to talk to her. And she said it was very difficult for her to talk to her dad. But she was satisfied, I think, when she left. The chief, as I said, we didn't know his name until just a couple of years ago. That was my fault because he's always been the chief. So in all the cruise books, I was always looking at commissary-man chiefs and trying out all the names to see if I could find him. And then one night, one of the guys said, "When did you make chief anyway? Did you make chief while you were underway?" And he said yes. And I realized, I went back to the cruise books, and instead of looking for a chief, I started looking for a first-class commissary-man. And sure enough, I found CS1 George Parker, who turned out to be the chief. So again, do we know them? Do we know who they are? We don't. But I think it's pretty safe to say that we do enough work to get a pretty good idea that we've narrowed down who these people are. And as I said, we speak to them every single weekend. We bring guests aboard, sometimes 30 at a shot, and they are amazed at the activity they get when we have 4 or 5 of these REM pods all going off when we're talking to these guys back aft. We have some people aboard that are not sailors from the ship. We have a young woman, a nurse named Allison, who said she came aboard through a portal in one of the berthing areas and was unable to find her way back. She came looking for her brother, who was an engineering officer aboard the ship. And we found him. He was a lieutenant commander, and we found him. He was an engineering officer. He's not there now. I don't know that his entity is there, but in life he was aboard the ship. Allison came looking for him and couldn't find him, couldn't find her way back. But now, Allison isn't interested in leaving at all, because Allison seems to have developed a relationship with a Marine gunnery sergeant who stands watch down at the brig. His name is Patrick. And they seem to be together a lot in berthing. They seem to be together a lot in down by the brig in that area, which is where the Marine berthing was. And now when we ask Allison if she wants to go back, she tells us no, she's perfectly content right where she is. Patrick is an interesting case because we've never really spoken to him, just barely. But for many, many years now, I would be the last one aboard the ship when we have guests. And now we have a computer that does it. But back in the day, when everybody left, I would have to walk the length of the ship, down aft and all the way back, turning off all the lights. And I'm going to tell you, that was the only time I ever felt uncomfortable on the ship. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, everybody else is gone, and I'm just there making sure it's as dark as it's ever going to get. And something I never told anyone, for no reason other than the fact that it was just my little thing, was that as I walked down that passageway, I always felt, sometimes heard, somebody walking in the other passageway, like parallel to me. And I never told anybody about it. Like I said, it was just my little thing. So last year we had some guys aboard who were filming a TV thing called Pathways that was kind of interesting. And what they did was they did a bunch of like 20-minute investigations in different locations on the ship, and they used a different method everywhere they went. And when they were down the brig, they had a psychic with them. So while they were down there, the production assistant came and got me and brought me down there and said to me, "Why would there be Marines on the ship?" And I said, a ship as big as Salem always had a Marine contingent. I don't know how many guys. I'm sure it wasn't a platoon, maybe 20 guys. And she said, oh, because she said, there's a Marine down here and he has a message for you. He told me to tell you not to worry. He's the guy that walks with you. She said, do you have any idea what that means? And to be honest, I initially said no. And then I said, I do, and I told her. And she said, he told me that he loves to walk with you because you seem to be the only one that loves the ship the way he does. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I said to her, well, you should tell him that he doesn't have to walk in the other passageway. He can come over and walk with me if he wants to. That would be completely okay with me. But he's still there, and I still hear him sometimes. We have some audio of him down in the brig, little snippets, nothing really major. And we have other guys. You see this guy, Gene Forbes? He's a dental technician that we spoke to in the surgery. And he's a guy who I think at some point just kind of went, hey, I have a story too. We haven't heard from him since. But we talked to him the one time and we found him. He definitely was there. He was definitely there in '58, no question about it. So yeah, you see all this other stuff are just things that we write down, names that we get on audio. We write down names that we get from other entities that say things. And little by little, we're piecing together the history of these guys, when they were aboard the ship, when they left, if they did leave. Why they're back, maybe. Shackelford down the bottom, we think he's the guy that caused the explosion aboard the Pierce. He takes credit for it. He said he did it on purpose. There were some guys that used to make fun of him, and he wanted to hurt them. Because I'm sure he didn't count on getting killed in the explosion himself. So these are the guys. And we have evidence. Mostly, we have a lot of audio. This first audio is what I like to call the old standard. Any group that investigates any location has some form or another.
You like us investigating your ship?
I'm not sure there's a investigation group anywhere that doesn't have some version of an entity telling them to get out, or that he doesn't want them there, or that he doesn't want them investigating.
You like us investigating your ship?
But I like this one better. One of the things I tell people when they come to the ship is when they record audio, it's going to be contextual. All of our audio has context. The clip you're about to hear, this isn't the surgery, it's the prep room. But we were aboard the ship, 3 of us alone. We were getting ready for a Halloween event, and we were trying to record audio evidence to play for the guests. And we couldn't get into the room. I didn't have my keys. So we were talking about how to get in. They were talking about climbing over the plexiglass and all this other foolishness. And I was talking about trying to jimmy the door. And as we were doing that, the woman who was with us said, well, when I get in there, I'm going to lay on the table. I'm going to put my feet in the stirrups. And I'm going to record some audio and see what we get. Well, when we played that conversation, not her in there, but that conversation, we heard a little girl's voice. It's fast, but it's pretty clear once you hear it.
Oh, this is the surgical area.
You want to go with the easy yeah?
How did you get there? Very cool.
Did you hear it? Did you hear it?
The surgical area.
You want to go with the easy yeah?
How did you get there? Very cool.
I think she's saying, how would you get there? Like she was reminding us that we hadn't figured out how to get in the room yet. So talking about what we were going to do when we got there was kind of silly.
Oh, this is the surgical area.
You want to go with the easy yeah?
How did you get there? Very cool. Oh, this.
So this is a pretty good piece of audio too. I always stick it in there. It's not from the Salem. We went to a prison in New Jersey, Mid-Orange Correctional Facility. And as you can see, I'm a little bit gimpy right now. When we went down to Mid-Orange, I was using a walker. And the truth of the matter is, the only reason I went was because they had canceled this investigation twice because of my knee. And I felt really bad. So this time I said, oh no, I'm fine, I'm fine. It was a nightmare. I popped some stitches. I think I almost bled to death. So at the end of the investigation, we had kind of set up shop in the auditorium. And at the end of the investigation, they were going to go up to the 5th floor of this building we were in, and obviously I wasn't going to do that. So I said, I'm going to stay here in the auditorium. You guys go ahead. Just turn off the lights when you leave, because I'm going to record in here. I get the feeling there's something going on in here. So what you're going to see is you're going to see the stage. I promise.
You want to keep making that noise? Please do. I don't know what it is you're doing to make that noise. Is it a footstep? Maybe you could tell me what it is. The device I'm holding in my hand will record anything you say. I may not be able to hear it now, but I'll hear it later when I play it back.
Walking.
Did you hear him? It's kind of soft. I don't know how to fast forward this.
You want to keep making that noise? Please do. I don't know what it is you're doing to make that noise. Is it a footstep?
That's softer, isn't it?
Maybe you could tell me what it is. The device I'm holding in my hand will record anything you say. I may not be able to hear it now, but I'll hear it later when I play it back.
Here it is.
Walking.
He says walking. It's pretty clear. So sometimes we're not talking about audio, we're not talking about video, sometimes it's just photographs. This was somebody during the Halloween event that took this picture when they were down on the pier. I thought it was pretty neat. This one here, that is the surgery aboard Salem. And we're sitting in the office, and somebody said, there's a woman crying in the surgery, I can hear her. So we went down and we took this picture. And what I love about this picture, I don't know if you can tell, this is the table, the surgical table. So it looks like there's somebody laying on the table. But what I love about this picture is it looks to me like there are people standing around the table. Here, over here. It looks to me like there are people standing around the table. But this is my favorite. This is what I consider to be a once-in-a-lifetime capture. We're in the hospital on the ship. The woman in orange keeps saying, there's somebody behind me. I know there is. And then the kid on the left says, somebody just hit my arm. So I lean out and take a picture. Well, there's nobody here. The woman in orange and the kid on the far left are the only people in this photograph. That guy is so solid. This is a water cooler, and he's blocking it out. And I'm telling you, he wasn't there. I took this picture. This is what I consider to be a once-in-a-lifetime catch. So the only other thing I want to show you, I talked about the Conjuring house. The family in the movie, the Perron family, not the oldest daughter, but the next oldest daughter, his name is Andrea Perron. Andrea is a very good friend of mine. And while she's about as wonderful a woman as you'll ever meet, the first guy that used the expression out there, he was talking about Andrea. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, because I love her to death, but she is the definition of out there. Andrea left ghosts in the rearview mirror a very, very long time ago, and now focuses on extraterrestrials. But not just flying saucers. I mean, she focuses on her relationship with the extraterrestrials and how she travels with them and all this other stuff. Like I said, I love Andrea, but she's out there. So last summer, Andrea came to the ship, and I didn't realize it until she got there, but she had hurt her hip and couldn't go below. But she said, that's okay, there's plenty going on right up here. And I said, okay, and away I went. And then she sent me these pictures. Now, in this picture, you see the 3 dots, right? 1, 2, and then one way the heck over there. And now in the next picture, they kind of come together as a triangle. And I hate to date myself, but that's the building I worked in when the shipyard was open. So they come together as a triangle above that building, and then they left, but they all left together in this triangle. And I was like, I don't know. She said, this is like every night. I can't believe you've never seen them, like I was an idiot. So I was saying earlier, we have a Halloween event every year, and what we do is it's basically an investigation in costumes, but we have a very, very talented medium who comes and does gallery readings, and this year I've got a good friend by the name of Mike Stevens who has a company called Granite Sky Services, and they provide counseling to UFO abductees, is what they do. Yeah, see, you're up. And I love Mike because when you first hear what he does, you think, okay, so nutcake. And then you see him, and you think, okay, nutcake. And then he starts talking, and you realize he's not a nutcake. He's a very, very smart guy, and he is very, very serious about what he does. So this year, he's going to do a sky watch on the ship during our Halloween event to see if he can pick up any of this stuff. So that's all I've got. I didn't keep you a hell of a lot longer than I was supposed to. Everybody have a good Halloween. Do you have any questions?
Many years ago, maybe
Uh-oh.
like 25 or 30 years ago, the USS Salem had a haunted ship
Mm-hmm.
event for the kids. Did the entities find that jarring to have that, because it was silly.
Yeah. So when they had
Surgery and,
they had the haunted ship, which was the ship itself,
yeah.
the volunteers. But then later, they had something called Ghost Ship Harbor, which was a huge thing. It was a Vegas-run operation. I mean, it was a big deal. And what the guy did was he rented the ship for 5 years, from mid-September to the first week in November, for 5 years. And the first year, they lost some money. I think they were prepared to lose some money because they had to build the thing, you know. And then the second year, they kind of broke even, but they started to have some problems, and it started to become pretty clear that the entities aboard the ship were not thrilled with what was going on. They had a room they called the seance room, and the way it worked was a guide would bring everybody the guests into a room, and they'd sit around a table, and then he would sit in a chair by the door that had buttons under it. So he'd press a button and something would fall off the wall, or the planchette would fly off the Ouija board, stuff like this. And it wasn't, I don't think they were trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. You know what I mean? I think it was just entertainment. The psychic every night was, it was a matter of who's going to be the psychic tonight kind of thing. So it's not like they really went out of their way to make it authentic. But the third year, they didn't even make it to October before it got very, very intense. Things falling off the walls. Fires started to light on the ship. and they had no idea where the next one would light. And it got to the point that it was a major league safety issue, and they pulled the plug. I don't think they ever got to October. I think they did the first 2 weeks of September and just pulled the plug on the whole thing. There was a lot of money involved, but it was bad. And I think the entities on the ship were just sick and tired of it, which is why. So we have our Halloween thing Saturday night. We do it every year. And what we do is on Wednesday night beforehand, we go to the ship and primarily talk to the chief and make sure he knows this Saturday night is Halloween, brother, and this is what we're going to do. Fortunately, I think they know it's us. You know what I mean? And they know we're not going to do any jump scares or junk like that. So we've never had any problems, but it was bad. Like I say, fires lighting on the ship. They had to stop because they just didn't know where it was going to, how bad it was going to get.
What's the kind of requirements that your team or other investigators would be looking at if someone was interested in engineering new technology or new devices for leading investigations?
I love what you're saying, but I'm not sure what the question was.
As in like, do they do you have to go through like multiple different kinds of rounds? Like this works, this doesn't work.
Oh, absolutely.
And then what's the kind of like if someone wanted to say, I'm interested in learning more about like the engineering aspects, as in like, because I've been interested in the engineering side of.
There are a lot of people in our field who make their own equipment. There are a lot of people in our field, and frankly, nowadays it's at the point where a lot of it is, it's kind of silly. Like, it's the same stuff we always use, but it's shaped like a coffin, and you know what I mean? And it's silliness. But somebody like you, somebody who sounds as serious as you do, that's something that I'd be interested in talking about. I would love that. You take one of my cards, I would love to talk about that. All right? That's all we got? Two measly questions?
Was that,
You don't have to ask a question. I was just.
I was going to ask afterwards, but maybe other people want. So when you were at the Emory on Friday night, is that when that happened, or was that before with Timothy?
How do you know I was at the Emory on?
Because I was there Saturday and they mentioned.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. No, that was last summer.
Oh, okay. That was just last week.
Okay. That was a little spooky for just a second. Yeah. See, the Christy Parrish, who runs the Emory, unlike me, she doesn't have a group of people dumb enough to keep showing up all the time. She doesn't have a team. So if I'm not busy on the ship and she's got an event, I'll go down there and I'll help out. Rick Smith is there all the time, and Joe Ranoni's there occasionally, and I go down there occasionally. And
So they were blessed that you were there.
well, they certainly were. I love it there. It's a great look. It's a great location, and I love Christy. Was she there?
Yes.
I love Christy because she's, at this point, one of the few people in our field who is like us in that I think if you tortured her, she'd tell you the history was way more important to her than the ghosts. So I love working with Christy. Anytime I can help Christy out, I love to do that.
It was quite an experience.
Yeah, it's a great
3
place.
hours. It was well worth it.
Yeah, did they do the 2 first? Was it 2 investigations?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Well, Friday night, the way they do it is they have one at 6:30 and one at 9.
Yes, they did. I went to the 9 o'clock one.
Okay, all right.
12, so that was good.
Okay, see, we can't do that on the ship because the ship's too big.
Okay.
So when we do a public investigation, we have 25 or 30 people, and it's 6:30 to midnight or so. Right. And we do 6:30 to midnight, bang.
Oh, okay. And when is the next one?
Where it'll be in mid-November. The ship closes Thanksgiving.
Okay.
But I can't schedule them fast enough. I schedule them, they sell out in a week. And
For that already on Everbright or not?
say again?
Do you have to go to Everbright to get?
No. The ship, you go to usssalem.org. We sell, because I guess it's important that I say, we don't make any money, my group. When you buy tickets to our events, you buy them through the ship's website,
Okay.
and every nickel goes to the ship. We don't make any money off those investigations. Nothing. The ship needs the money, and we enjoy doing it. So, yes, my friend.
Have you found like anything at the back on the fantail, like outside on the top?
Not really. You mean above, like where the elevator is?
No, like the fantail, which is like the back.
Yeah, where the elevator. That's that big slab that's risen up. That's the elevator. That's where they used to bring the helicopter up and down. No, not really. Down below in the hangar, we've gotten activity, but no, never up topside. I got to be honest with you. I've never gotten it. Well, I shouldn't say never, but I've gotten very little stuff topside. Very, very little.
I do a thing. We just stopped going on the Salem, but we do like we meet during the summer on the Salem. And have you seen anything during the day?
Are you a Sea Scout?
No, it's Sea Cadets.
I'm sorry, Sea Cadets. Sorry. Oh yeah, it doesn't matter. You do it at night because it's creepier, but it really doesn't. It really doesn't matter. Down, especially on the ship, and you know this. Down below, you have no idea what the hell time it is, or it could be 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It could be 1 o'clock in the morning. It's all the same down there, right?
Have you seen any mean-spirited or hostile presences on the ship?
When we first started aboard the ship, the chief, before we knew who he was that angry guy back aft. And Robert, the radioman, he was another guy who was angry. We had Sandra actually said that the first time she encountered Robert, she said he rushed up to her and got in her face. And she said, I really believe if he could have hurt me, he would have. But I think over time, since we're there so much and since we talk to them so much, we really don't run into that anymore. There. As I said, at the Sally House, we ran into some entities that were bad news. At the Hinsdale House, the Dandy House in Hinsdale, New York, that's a place where there are some entities that are not good. And don't get me wrong, when I say, I don't use the D word, you know what I mean? When I'm talking about something bad, as far as I'm concerned, 99% of the time, it's an angry person. You know what I mean? It's a ghost who was angry when they died or who had more anger than anything else, so that when their body ran out, their anger is still left. That kind of thing. I don't think there's anything, I won't say never, but I've never run into anything other than that.
Have you ever brought a Ouija board to the Salem?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Has anyone ever said anything?
Yeah, there's a woman in my crew, her name is Eva, and she is the Ouija queen. We don't touch the Ouija board without Eva. Because, and don't get me wrong, a Ouija board is the same as one of these things. It's just a tool like everything else. But at the same time, I'm not a big fan of fooling around with it. It's like, I know there's not a monster under the bed. I also know that if I don't hang my foot over the side, it can't get me. You know what I mean? And there have been times when we've been cruising along with a Ouija board and it seems like everything's fine, everybody's having a good time, and Eva will say, something's wrong, time to shut down. And she knows how to do it right, to say the goodbyes and all that good stuff. We've had occasions on the ship where the board turned instead of the planchette, which is always fun. We have some pretty good video of that. So yeah, we've used it on the ship a few times. We don't use it very often, but we've used it a few times.
Chief ever said anything to you?
Through the board?
Yeah.
No. In fact, now that you ask, I'm going to say, I'm not sure any of the entities that we speak to regularly have spoken to us through the board. I'll tell you this, we used one at the Conjuring House, and we had just been talking to somebody about how there was some kind of extraterrestrial connection to the Conjuring House, and everything we got seemed like gibberish to us. And we kept asking, where are you from? And it kept going to the sun in the corner of the board. And then when we started looking at all the letters, we found that it was some kind of language that like the Mesopotamians had used when they said they were talking to their gods. It was kind of crazy. It was kind of crazy. And that was the Ouija board. So, I don't know. But yeah, we use it occasionally.
I keep hearing different perspectives on this, but could you explain why, and I have a follow-up question to that too, why is it that EMF and EVPs can be picked up through electronic means, and is it like something that has to do with the composition, or is it just something that, and follow up to that, do you find more success through electronic or digital or analog means?
Okay, so thanks for coming. As I said, I prefer analog stuff. I prefer my dowsing rods. As far as like EVPs and why we get them on electronic, I've always kind of seen it as, a painter needs a canvas. And I've always taken that sometimes these entities may not be strong enough, thank you, may not be strong enough to manifest on their own. They may need a media. I don't know. They may need a canvas. That's why people use spirit boxes, because that white noise a lot of times is the kind of canvas that the entities need to bring forth what they can do.
Has anyone tried using an EEG in order to communicate with?
Not as far as I know.
Okay.
Who the hell even has an EEG? I guess that was a loaded question, wasn't it?
Sorry, I don't mean to do my mouth. I'll shoot you an email.
Yeah, please do. I have cards up here. Please do, because I would love to talk about what you could do in terms of creating a piece of equipment. I would love that.
Do any of the entities, have they ever expressed a feeling of being trapped on the ship and wanting to pass over?
The only one I talked about, the guy Shackelford, and he's the only one now who is talking about wanting to leave. And it's one of those things where we've told him that we're going to try to find the right person to help him go where he wants to go. That's one of the, who the hell are we to keep him? You know what I mean? If he wants to go, it's not up to us to make him stay. If we can help him go, then we're going to do that. And he's the only one right now. He's the one, like I said, he takes credit for the explosion on the Pierce. He says he did it on purpose. He said that people didn't like him on the Pierce, and he says that nobody likes him on the Salem, and he wants to go. Which by the way, I get, because he's a pain in the neck. He tends to make believe he's other people, so that a lot of times we don't know who we're talking to, because it's occasionally him. So he is a pain in the neck, and I'm thinking that sometime early next season we're going to send him on his way. Which will be a shame, because we talk to him a lot. But, like I said, if he wants to go, the hell are we to keep him? So. All righty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it.